Well, here we are, Free Kiwis, and we're here today to talk about the Charlie Kirk assassination and some of the aftermath of that and its free speech implications. I think that's probably a reasonable summary of what we want to discuss.
Yeah, that's right. So I think we should start off, well, maybe I should start off by saying I feel slightly uncomfortable talking about this topic, and I'm not really sure why. I think obviously like a lot of topics are polarized at the moment, but I feel like this one is kind of making clear how polarized our politics has become, or well, I should say how polarized American politics has become. But everywhere else in the English-speaking world, and to some extent in the whole world, we've always followed American politics because the United States is such an important country.
And American social trends and so on.
Exactly, and I think that like all the stuff that we've been interested in, the reason that we founded Free Kiwis was to talk about free speech, partly in a university context, because we both used to work for Victoria University of Wellington, and I feel like, especially in that case, a lot of these trends about people on university campuses turning against free speech, including the professors and many of the students, all of that really came out of the States, and so really that's the kind of epicenter for the social changes we've been seeing on that front. And here, like, I think the reason I feel slightly uncomfortable talking about it is because everything's so polarized, everything's so fast moving. I, like a lot of people now, get a lot of my news and a lot of my sort of debates from social media, especially X. And I've been, because I knew we were going to do this, I've been sort of thinking about, I've been trying to like make sure to read stuff about Charlie Kirk and the reaction to it. And I find it's been very bewildering because there's all these claims and counterclaims. That for a while it was like, oh, the shooter's definitely a woke leftist, and then it's, oh no, the shooter's actually a
really
groiper.
a groiper,
And then I have to look up what the hell is
an
a
ultra
groiper.
Marxist who was
Exactly.
who apparently of the belief that Charlie Kirk wasn't Republican enough or MAGA enough.
That's right. And he was aligned with Nick Fuentes and people like that. So then you have to kind of read, because I'm not online. Like I'm sort of online, but I'm not online enough
I
to
mean, it
know.
seemed like a kind of implausible idea. But then I did remember that both Anwar Sadat and Itzhak Rabin were murdered by people ostensibly on their own side. Sadat by an
Yeah.
Islamist extremist,
Yeah.
and Rabin by a Jewish Orthodox extremist.
Yeah, there's a plaque down the road commemorating that.
Right.
And
So these
also
things do
Gandhi as well, I think, a Hindu nationalist.
That's a good point. Yeah.
So it's possible. But anyway, let's not get into that immediately.
Yeah.
I just wanted to sort of flag, yeah, I feel sort of slightly weird talking about this. I don't know what to believe. And I think maybe this is just kind of like something to say at the beginning that there's lots that we don't know. This guy is still being tried. Like we don't even know if he did it. I mean, it looks pretty clear that he did it, but we don't even know.
Yeah.
So all of this is kind of provisional, but this is the kind of world we're in. I think it's better to kind of proceed with caution.
And just on that, I would say that the motives of the killer to me are not the biggest issue here. Like, it's of interest, obviously, to know what motivated somebody to commit a political assassination, but of more interest to me is the reaction of everybody else, whether that's the media or what's happening on social media, and what that tells us about, as you say, the state of polarization and where we're at.
Okay, but let's get into it then, because actually, I might argue that it is actually really important to know what the motives of the killer were, because, like, if the motives of the killer were, like, imagine he was a woke leftist.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some evidence for that. I mean, they found these bullet casings with sort of
anti-fascist
slogans,
and he had a trans boy/girlfriend, and
that's right. So if he was killing Charlie Kirk because he took the view that, and I think there was stuff that they found on his phone saying like there's too much hate coming out of Charlie Kirk's mouth or something like that. If he actually killed Charlie Kirk because he wanted to shut him up because he felt that what Charlie Kirk was saying about trans people was literally harmful, that's kind of big, right? Because, all these things we've been worrying about for years, how wokeists have been saying speech is literally harmful. We in the Free Speech Union and others have been warning for years. If you say that speech is harmful, that's
where it can lead
by violence, right?
You're dead right. I mean, that's a really important thing to know. And if somebody has been moved to commit murder over what somebody else has reputedly believes or has said, or what kind of person they are, then that does tell us something about what certain characterizations can lead to.
Yeah. So that's the kind of temptation that I have. Like when I first heard the news and I looked and it seemed to be someone woke, the temptation was to say, oh, this just goes to show that, wokeism leads to violence. But then I kind of catch myself because, of course, that's what the woke always say. Like they've always been telling us, if you are slightly right of center and if you are conservative, then that kind of leads to fascism, right? Automatically. They have this very exaggerated view of the slippery slope. where it's like if you take conservative views or you discuss trans things in the wrong way, it immediately leads to harm. It leads to shooters. It leads to terrible things. And not just the argument that like speech will harm people psychologically, but also there's this very strong form of the argument that this is inevitably going to lead to kind of like far right.
Well, actually, they make a stronger claim, which is that words can literally be violence in themselves, which is a different claim than it can lead to. I mean, I think
they make both claims, though. I mean,
they do make
they've
both
made
claims, but
claims,
I think that the claim that words can lead to violence is sort of trivially true. I mean, you can incite people to violence, and they can sometimes take up that incitement.
Yeah, but that's not what
violence.
they mean, right? They mean something like if I say maybe it's not the case that if you declare you're a man, you declare you're a woman, you're automatically a woman. They think that even that kind of thing can lead to, well, A, psychological harm in the trans people.
Yes.
But also they think it can lead to kind of white supremacy. Well, maybe not that particular issue, but like people saying things about race that are un-PC on campus, that's going to empower. Like, we've had all this
How
language.
white
It's
supremacy
going to
is-
embolden the far right, you know,
Yeah.
and then there's going to be shooters and bombs.
I mean,
and
to be
stuff.
fair, I don't think that's quite the claim that's being made about the Charlie Kirk situation. I mean, it might be by some, but the formulation that I have a lot of time for has been articulated both by Ben Shapiro and Konstantin Kisin. So Shapiro called it, I think, an enabling framework or a permission framework for violence when you start yelling that people are Nazis. Because, you know, if we truly believed that our society was about to be overrun by Nazis, that actually Nazis are everywhere and they could take over the state. And there have been these kinds of rather overheated claims in the American media that, you know, Trump is an existential threat to democracy and so on. Well, if people start really believing that, then, you know, perhaps that does lead to a situation where they feel more justified in committing acts of violence because, you know, Nazis are pretty bad.
Yeah, exactly. It depends how you talk about it. Like, I actually believe that Trump does pose a significant risk to the existence and the persistence of American democracy and republicanism.
He poses a risk to democracy.
That doesn't mean that he's a Nazi, right?
It doesn't mean he's a Nazi.
It doesn't even mean he's a fascist.
And it doesn't
mean you have to kill him.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, he's certainly done things that you could say are a threat to democracy, but I don't believe that he's actually a risk because I think that the institutions of American democracy remain strong enough to withstand him, put it that way.
Yeah, I mean, both things can be true. Like you can have a system that's probably going to be strong enough to withstand Trump, and I believe that. But you can also think that Trump, maybe he's not even actively trying to undermine it in the way that he's like pursuing a plan. But I think that his personality is such that, like with the last election when Biden defeated him, he obviously couldn't deal with that emotionally, and he made up all this stuff about, you know, fraudulent elections, and then
some of his supporters then stormed the Capitol.
You could say that, like, okay, he wasn't like strictly planning a coup, but you know, he tried to, you know, it was really only the vice president, what was his name, Pence, who kind of stood up to that and said, no, we're going to accept this.
We're going to go with the election results.
So I think there is a big risk, but yeah, I agree with you that it's a weird situation where, like, I think Trump is a risk, but it's still the case that people on the woke left have exaggerated the risk.
Yeah, but I think we're getting a little sidetracked. I would say that the woke claims about the extent to which words either are violence or can lead directly to it are more inflated than what people, at any rate, like Konstantin Kisin and Ben Shapiro have been saying about creating an atmosphere in which certain people who might be already quite unhinged might be activated to
I think that's a more
violence.
moderate claim, but again, I'm really struck by the sort of similarity and the symmetry, because I think even that more moderate claim was made a few years ago by the woke, right? That it's like if you use certain language, then that enables it makes things easier for fascists, right?
Sure, and I mean there's justification in that
violence.
claim up to a point.
This thing, so let's get into it. So it's like, I think it's very important. I think the university's role actually in this situation should be not to inflame. I mean, their role should be to say what's true. And I think what's often true in these situations is that you have to get very serious about epidemiology and statistics, right? So the question is, like, if there's a slippery slope, how slippery is it? And in this case, I would say that it probably is the case that there's a small number of people who will consider shooting somebody because of the kind of language you've been talking about, that people are called fascists when they're really just conservatives. But it's a very small number of people, right?
Yes.
So we basically have one guy. In the last few years, we've had all this rhetoric from the woke left about
there were a
how
couple
anyone...
of people who tried to kill Trump as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess this is a really clear case of maybe the woke left creating violence on campus, because it's sort of very much on campus. It's somebody coming onto campus. And we've seen, I mean, even you've been exposed to like very, very mild versions of this.
Yeah.
Like when they organized the free speech event at Vic and they said, you can't talk because your words are violence.
And,
Obviously there's no suggestion
and
anyone
there
was
were
going to be
certainly
violent
people
towards
within
you,
the university, as the emails we got under the OIA showed, who were bandying about the word racist with gay abandon about me and others.
Yeah.
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 So that's true. But I guess to me, it's a bit like saying we need to well, we could consider the case where people say we need to ban hate speech because hate speech can lead to violence. And I guess, you know, I mean, I wouldn't say that there's no such thing as hate speech. I mean, you can certainly conceptualize hateful speech, and you can also conceptualize circumstances in which that could result in violence. But the thing is that we have to set the threshold somewhere for what people are allowed to say legally and what they're not. So, and we do. There's the threshold of incitement to violence.
Yeah.
So that is illegal, and I think you and I agree that it should be illegal, because the line between incitement to violence and actual violence can be pretty direct, right?
Well, the reason I would say that that's a good line is because in some ways, like the places where I think there should be limits on speech are where, in some sense, the speech actually becomes action. So there's things like abuse, like videos of abuse or like snuff videos of shootings and stuff like that. For me, the problem isn't so much the expression or the speech. The problem is that those necessarily involve, bad, criminal, very harmful acts. So what you're penalizing there is really more the action. So with incitement to violence, like I think, strictly speaking, in most countries, the line is higher than people think it is, like in the current discourse. They think it's just things like, for example, when I think someone we know once said, what we should do is fill the Ministry of Education in New Zealand with TNT and blow it sky high, right?
Yeah.
That wasn't actually a serious incitement to violence, right? Because most people who are sane know that was a joke. David Seymour said something similar about was it the Ministry for Pacific Peoples or something? Or is that,
right, yeah.
Is that even a ministry?
Yeah.
He said something about some part of New Zealand public service, we should blow it up. And some people said, oh, that's incitement to violence. I would say it's not incitement to violence because it's clearly a joke. So, I mean, strictly speaking, I think incitement to violence has to be, there's a credible threat, and also it's something like an order. So it's something like I'm a gang leader, or I'm like a head of a terrorist organization, and I'm basically instructing, or like maybe I'm a demagogue of some sort, and I have a big crowd of people, and I'm saying like,
let's
go over there. Those people are
and
stealing
beat
the
up
vote,
those-
or whatever it is, right? And or let's go. There are terrible Canadian immigrants in this country, and we need to do something about them.
Give them all a head injury. Yeah.
And there's some pitchforks over there. That kind of thing is incitement to violence. Not so much. I mean, because you're allowed, in a way, you're allowed to be in favor of violence. This is an important point, right? So, for example, I'm allowed to say, I think we need to invade Australia. Australians are terrible. We need to take over their country. Or a bit more seriously, like you're allowed to be in favor of like the Iraq war back in the day. I mean, I know you weren't, and lots of people weren't. And that's fine, a different debate. But like, you're allowed to say like our country's military should go and defeat their country's military.
Yep.
You're also allowed to say things like, well, you actually are allowed. You should be allowed to say things like, as a policy point, I think that there are too many undocumented immigrants in this country, illegal aliens,
and we should
round them up physically by force.
Or I'm in favor of the death penalty. I'm not, but you could say I'm in favor of the death penalty, which is
or you could say
violence.
I'm in favor of rugby, which involves
violence. Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
On this point, though, I mean, you're right. Of course, at least in New Zealand, the bar for being convicted or charged with incitement to violence is pretty high. But we might think of other countries that you might think that was the case in as well. Graham Linehan, who is an erstwhile guest on Free Kiwis, was arrested in England for saying something like, if you see a trans woman in a woman's bathroom, kick her in the balls.
Yeah, that's right.
Now, that was taken to be an incitement to violence, where it was obviously a joke. I mean, the man's a comedian, and
yeah. And then the whole thing about women having balls, that's obviously meant to be funny, right?
Precisely. So,
whereas presumably if you're woke, though, you just think that's just a reality that women have balls. So, but anyway, I guess the point is like, what was his intention in saying that? I mean, it's sort of like with Graham Linehan, he's got a lot of followers and stuff. So you might say, is it plausible that people would have gone out and done it? Like, I actually don't think it is. I think we should have a very high bar for these things.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. Like, he's a comedian. Like, you need to take that into account.
So to come back to the point, that we do have a bar somewhere, and it's pretty high for when words plausibly translate into violence, and there's a legal bar on using words in that way, called incitement to violence, right?
Yeah.
Whereas there's a whole lot of things that are below that bar. And I don't think that either Shapiro or Kissen are arguing that people who say that Trump is a Nazi and Charlie Kirk was a Nazi and so on should be arrested for saying that. They're simply pointing out that by saying that a lot for a really long time, they've created an atmosphere in which crazy people are more likely to actually commit acts of violence against those kinds of people.
Okay, so if people like Graham Linehan and maybe us, if we constantly are saying that trans people aren't really, men who say they're trans women are just pretending to be women, are we not creating the conditions for violence against them because we're kind of dehumanizing them and mocking them and stuff?
Well, I don't think that you or I have ever mocked them as.
No,
we might have.
Okay, let's keep us out of it, but maybe like the more robust sort of turfs or something on X.
Yeah.
This is what lots of people at the university would say, right? They're creating the conditions for violence against trans people. Leaving aside, they also think that there's psychological harm, but I think they actually think that there's going to be an epidemic of violence against trans people because of some of this language.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's why I prefer, especially in what I say publicly. I mean, I might have private jokes or something like that, but what I say publicly, we want to be pretty straight down the line and talking about issues rather than, mocking people or making fun of people.
Yeah, I agree.
And certainly, than vilifying people. I mean, mocking is one thing. It's not kind. It's not nice, whatever. But, vilifying and casting as evil, that's a slightly different category. And
it's tricky, isn't it? Because it's kind of what the law says, and I would defend people's right, like Graham and others. I definitely defend the rights to have really rude jokes about trans people.
I don't think that's the point. Even vilifying, even saying, my neighbor's a Nazi, or all Canadians are Nazis, or whatever.
Yeah,
I mean, it's clearly not true, and so on. But it shouldn't be illegal. But I think it's still, within the realm of what's legal, legitimate to point out the effect that certain things might have and to say maybe that's not such a good thing to do without calling for anyone to be banned or arrested.
Yeah, so it's kind of like when we're in the mood of, and when we're off are in the mood of doing this, like we're anti-polarization too. I think that's one of the themes on this podcast. Even though we defend people's rights to mock and jeer, in this podcast, I guess at least what we're trying to do is reach middle ground and say, trans people have rights too, and they have, there are probably things on even the craziest sort of gender ideology. There are some things about it that are kind of true or half true, right? Like it's true, for example, that gender expression or sex differences are partially mediated culturally. It's just not true that they're wholly a cultural matter, right? There's also biological concerns, but yeah. So okay, so it's just interesting to me how the two sides have sort of switched around in this debate after this particular event,
and in more ways than one.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking before we switched on the mics about Pam Bondi, who I think more or less verbatim said, "Hate speech is not free speech is not hate speech."
Exactly.
Now we've heard that before, but not from the right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we heard that a few years ago from Chris Fafoy. Like, the Labour government at the time were trying to bring in hate speech laws. And they were trying to strengthen existing hate speech laws and make them much more formidable. But yeah, I mean, so the things have switched around. And so, Pam Bondi, that's just one episode in really what seems to me to be like a very unambiguous cancel culture campaign against anyone who has spoken about Charlie Kirk's death or Charlie Kirk himself in the wrong way. And for me, it's just like incredibly similar to a few years ago when the woke left were canceling everybody for like saying things in the wrong way, right? Like, the instructor in a college in the States who said this Chinese word that sounded like an American ethnic slur in the wrong way. All these things, people are getting canceled for ridiculous things. Yeah. And now we've got it on the other side. So I actually got Claude to type out
some instances.
A list. So, and also this includes, and this is one of our main concerns on the podcast too, academics and teachers. So we're really concerned about academic freedom. And usually from the woke left, we had a whole chapter in our report about that. But all now from the right. So I said, Claude, give me examples of academic firings. East Tennessee State University, 2 faculty members have been placed on administrative leave pending further review after complaints about Facebook comments, including "you reap what you sow," and "this isn't a tragedy, it's a victory" about Charlie Kirk. Middle Tennessee State University fired a staff member for similar reasons. University of Mississippi Chancellor Glenn Boyce said a staff member was let go due to comments the individual had reshared on social media about Charlie Kirk's death. Ball State University terminated an employee who wrote that Kirk's death is a tragedy, but is also a reflection of the violence, fear, and hatred that he sowed. And according to Texas Governor Greg Abbott, nearly 300 teachers in the state are under investigation for speech criticizing Kirk. So all of this is like, to me, it's just very clear. It's an example of cancel culture. Like, okay, personally, I don't like it when someone's just died, if people then jump onto social media and say the guy was a dick. And I especially don't like this trope of kind of like, yeah, he died, but he said some things I disagree with, because it's kind of irrelevant. Like, I'm against murder, right? I'm against murder for people I disagree with.
Interestingly, our own RNZ did something fairly similar. So this is an article from RNZ the day after he was shot, or perhaps the very day he was shot. And the headline is, "Who was Charlie Kirk, the Trump ally and conservative activist killed in Utah?" And so it opens up with a bit of factual stuff about what happened. But then it goes on to a section, what were his views? So Kirk's views were aligned to conservative causes, including attacking COVID-19 vaccines, denying climate change, and attacking critical race theory views. He also often attacked the transgender community, arguing in one of his interviews, was it even a real thing? Kirk was amongst the first to share claims Haitian immigrants were eating cats and dogs, and so on. So the word attacked is used a lot there.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
They're very much casting him as this aggressive, divisive figure. And, you know, I mean, one can have views on that. You can listen to what he said and think, yeah, he was like that, or actually I agree with him. But as you just said, it's pretty distasteful to do it the minute somebody's been shot, especially when it was highly likely, even at that time, that it was a political murder. Nobody knew, but that seemed probable. And instead of kind of going into that, RNZ immediately jumps to this. I mean, they don't go so far as to say, and therefore perhaps, you know, he had some culpability in his own slaying or anything like that. They don't do that, but it kind of just points in that direction a little bit.
Attacked is an interesting word to use, because basically they're saying he attacked trans people because he was saying that maybe trans isn't a real thing. Whereas I know that can be confronting if you think you're trans, for someone to say maybe this isn't a real thing. But to me, that's not necessarily an attack. That's like if I'm depressed or something and I'm saying, Michael, my life is worthless, I feel like my career is terrible. And you say, I don't know if that's true, James. I think maybe you're looking at this the wrong way. Like, you're probably saying that in a spirit of friendship, right?
Yeah.
So you can actually try and correct what you see as people's delusions in a way that has a kind intention. I'm not even taking a position on whether they're really men or women or whatever. I'm just saying that, you know, not necessarily attacking somebody. For example, like, if people say to Christians, actually, I don't think Jesus is really the Son of God, I think it's all made up. You know, you could say that's attacking Christians, or you could say that's just their view,
doctrine. Right? Yeah.
It's really just attacking Christian doctrine, right? So why not say Charlie Kirk attacked gender ideology? Anyway, that's RNZ. So that goes to a conversation about concerns we have over what the state media is doing, whether the state media is biased and stuff.
Yeah.
But I guess what I was going to say is that, like, I don't particularly enjoy people mocking someone after they've died. Yeah. However, it's their right to do that. Like, they're allowed to do that, and you're allowed to do that without losing your job, right?
And I do think that RNZ is highly biased, and I wish they weren't. But neither do I think the journalist should be censured for writing that article. Right?
Yeah, I mean,
maybe I don't like the article. I think it's garbage. I think it's a terrible way to talk about somebody who's just been shot, especially if it's likely to be a political murder. But
I mean, it actually wasn't
so what?
Like that,
open society.
Most
they can
of
do that.
What you read to me, I thought was okay. Just that then with these attack stuff, and it's too clear to me that they dislike Charlie Kirk's views.
Yeah, well, that's it. Right. Yeah.
I don't think it's complete garbage. I mean, there's some information coming through there.
Yeah. But I think, well, you know, I think it's a rubbishy way to talk about somebody who's just been killed. Put it that way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's not as bad as like some of the things I've seen on Twitter.
Oh, nothing like it. Nothing like it.
Because I was trying to watch a lot. Usually I try and stay away from this content because it's so polarizing. But because we were going to do this, I actually watched some things. Like, there was this girl, what's she called? Shoe on Head. Have you seen her YouTubes?
No.
And she had like she's kind of an anti-woke person, I think. And she had this big compilation of people on TikTok on the woke left
celebrating Kirk's
they were basically
murder.
celebrating, isn't the best thing in the world, like full on, like, yes, you know, someone's died. And I find that extremely distasteful, because the way I was brought up was, you're not supposed to celebrate people's deaths. Like, people dying is always a sad thing. They had this guy had a family.
Even your enemies.
Exactly. You know, his children are going to be, you know, without their father for the rest of their lives. His wife, obviously, like, it's actually very sad in individual cases. And I understand that, like, okay, there are extreme cases, like, Hitler. Maybe if Hitler had been shot in the 30s, would I be really sad? Maybe not. But like, in most circumstances, you shouldn't celebrate people's death. But again, like, if we're going to be consistent about free speech, and I am, even though I dislike that intensely, and I'm not going to follow those
What I've
people
been saying
online.
for 5 years, like, people say things you don't like, so what?
Yeah, and you have to kind of deal with it yourself. And maybe, I mean, and you're allowed to do certain things which aren't cancel culture. So, for example, maybe if I knew someone who was on the sort of fringes of my social life here in Wellington, and I found that they posted a video when there's literally like celebrating Charlie Kirk's death and saying, hooray, let's kill, or like, it's great, a conservative died or something. I might not invite them to my birthday party or something, right? I might not want to hang out with them.
Yeah.
But I hope I wouldn't, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't like go up the
Seek
hill
to
and
have them
say,
arrested
let's
or
get them fired from
get
their
them
job
fired.
at Vic
Yeah.
or whatever.
No, that's right.
Um,
Just on that regard, in this regard, there was something, I think, there was something really quite beautiful that happened at Charlie Kirk's funeral, and there was also something extremely ugly. And it goes to this point about how we talk about people who not only say bad things, but actually, in some cases, kill our husbands. So Erica Kirk, his widow, stood up, and after quite a moving speech, I would say, she was clearly wrestling with herself. If you look at her face, it took her a few seconds to say it, but she said, that young man, I forgive him. And she did that because she's a Christian. And I don't think you or I count ourselves as Christians, but I think that is a very high kind of state that she was in to do that in front of a stadium full of people, to publicly forgive her husband's murderer.
Yeah, I think that's a powerful moment. And I think that shows some of the strengths of Christianity at its best in a way. I think Pope John Paul II forgave the person who tried to assassinate him. So there are other moments like that.
There have been other moments like that.
I'm not trying to diminish it. I'm saying it's been a
what
great tradition.
contrasts with that is Trump,
Yeah.
who also
Yes,
at Kirk's funeral said, "I hate my opponent and I don't want the best for them. I'm sorry, Erica." Like, why he would use a funeral as a soapbox to say things like that.
Well, this is one of the weird things about the Trump movement, is that there are all these conservative Christians. Well, A, there's Republicans who used to be really in love with the Constitution. B, there's all these Christians, and then Trump is not someone who's especially good at protecting the Constitution, and then he's obviously not someone who's a Christian or a very good Christian.
But be all that as it may, what we see there is an open environment for speech, and we see the best and the worst.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
So be it. That is an open
Yeah.
society where you can be the best and the worst.
Yeah.
And actually, what Trump does when he says something like that is reveal who he is and what he's like, just as Erica Kirk did the same in a different way.
Yeah, and there's another lesson in all this, which I think is very obvious, and we say every time the censors try and shut somebody down, is that it's counterproductive. And it's almost like the more strongly you try and censor someone and shut them down, the stronger sort of positive effect it has on them and their message. So like if you kill someone, it makes martyrs of them. We've said this consistently. If you shut even if you like cancel someone and get their book unpublished or something, there's a potential to actually make those views stronger. And we've seen this. We're seeing this now with there's this huge backlash in the States against all the woke stuff. I mean, that's part of the reason why they elected someone as unsuitable as Trump. And with Christianity as well, I mean, in some ways, you look across the developed world, it seems like Christianity's on the way out. There's an inverse correlation between economic development and religious belief.
Yeah.
So you think that as these countries get richer and richer, people are going to stop believing in Christianity. And so this guy comes on campus and he's preaching Christianity, and they shoot him. I mean, obviously people are going to say our faith is under attack. It's going to make it stronger. People are going to resent the killer and the things that he stands for, and they're going to start to look into the sorts of things that Charlie Kirk was look into the kind of things that Charlie Kirk was saying. And there's all these videos on YouTube now that are popping up because I started looking into this of Charlie, and I've been watching a lot, and it seems like they're exploding, right? All the numbers are going skyrocketing. People are watching all these Charlie Kirk videos where he's having exchanges with these woke students, and he's preaching like pretty strong, full-on Christianity, which I don't really really agree with or believe in. But it's kind of admirable, People are seeing that, and they're thinking.
I think what he was doing was admirable, irrespective of what his personal beliefs were. He was getting people to talk about ideas and disagree and argue, in a way that, and I think he was always pretty civil about it. I haven't seen him anywhere he's been particularly rude or obnoxious or
Yeah,
insulted people.
he definitely easily passes the test for me of like he's being civil. He's being more civil than a lot of our woke former colleagues.
And a lot of the people who he's talking to as well,
Yeah, exactly. I think
yeah,
there were some occasions where he's a little bit grandstanding.
sure.
He obviously has strong substantive beliefs of his own, so it's not entirely that he's there to be heterodox academy.
He's not just a
listen to different
facilitator.
views. He's also has
he's not
views.
a Peter Boghossian doing
Yeah.
spectrum street epistemology,
Exactly. Yeah.
but he is there to have the conversation, and especially with people with whom he disagrees. So
Yeah, exactly. And when people attack, I've seen loads of videos of people attack him, even people who you know, according to the rhetoric which is coming out of some of the woke left at the moment, you'd think that if there was like a young trans person, he would just abuse them. And okay, he's pretty strong on what he says to them. But I've not yet seen a video where he just kind of points to them and says, look at that freak, and laughs or anything. He says, you know, he says things which I think are sort of under argued. He says like, you know, Jesus loves you. It says in the Bible you shouldn't be like this. You know, I hope the church reaches out to you, and I'm sorry the church has failed you. Like words I wouldn't say because I don't believe, but like he's not just mocking them and shutting them down and telling them to go away.
yeah, that's right. But your point about, you know, martyrs, as it were, getting made stronger, we've seen that in a smaller context here. I mean, if we take the listener letter, for example, the well discussed episode of the listener 7 being attacked widely for publishing this letter about how muttering a Māori is not the same thing as science. Well, actually, the net result of that, I think, has been extremely positive for the message that, not only the message that they were promulgating in that letter, but also free speech in general, because it's more or less started a movement around them.
Yeah, that was the point when it got really crazy. I mean, I remember myself just thinking, we wrote an article together with some colleagues and published it, and soon after that, and I just remember thinking, like, this is the moment when you have to do something, because it's just so crazy. Like the idea that the Royal Society would be opening an investigation into some of their members for saying, having an opinion about whether Indigenous so-called knowledge is science. I mean, that just struck me as not appropriate to a free society.
Indeed, and while it was deeply unpleasant for the people involved, the 7 listener letter writers, they deserve credit for not only for speaking their minds, but I think they and others who rallied around them deserve credit for doing that, and kind of using that incident as a springboard for strengthening the free speech movement. And so I think that illustrates what you're saying. Nobody died, nobody was murdered or even punched, but there was a big kind of public furor in which people's jobs were threatened and people's positions were threatened. But in the end, it made their ideas stronger.
Yeah, so one of the things that people were saying around that time, I remember there was an article by Susie Wiles in, I think, the Auckland University newsletter, actually, where she was saying, and this was a trope of the time, people on the woke left in the universities were saying this a lot, it's not cancel culture, it's consequences culture, right?
Oh, yeah.
No one's being canceled. It's just that if you say bad things, there are inevitable consequences. Like maybe you lose your job or you get taken off teaching. I mean, no one lost a job, but like you can't be the acting dean anymore, like Doug Eliff. And of course, I mean, that phrase, I don't know about Susie Wiles was using it in this case, in this way, but like that phrase about it's not cancel culture, it's consequences culture, it was used to excuse some very egregious acts of cancellation when people were being like debanked and, you know, they were losing their jobs. They were basically kind of being driven out of polite society. So that's another case where you see like what the woke left used to say, now the strong right in America is saying. So I got a few questions about this. So I've seen there's a debate on X over this. So, I mean, my inclination in these cases, and I think yours is the same, is to say, you right-wingers are being hypocrites. I mean, we might even use James Lindsay's term, the woke right here. They're basically becoming the woke, and we should denounce them for that and say you need to be consistent. A few years ago, you guys on the right were in favor of free speech. Now you're not when it suits you. So I'm saying they're hypocrites. Some people on Twitter have said, actually, the way to look at this is more like they haven't. I haven't seen many people using this term, but they're kind of like engaging in game theory. And what they're trying to do is maybe self-consciously, they're like, yeah, I know we shouldn't really do this, but we have to do this because otherwise there's no disincentives on the woke left. So in other words, like the woke left were canceling people for years and they didn't get any blowback. And so everyone was saying like, well, just wait until the right's back in power, then you guys are going to be sorry.
Pop it.
And they were just kind of like, lol, you know, we hold all the power in the institutions, universities, press, whatever. So we're going to be fine. Then, of course, Trump comes into power, partly because they're being so obnoxious. And so now the right is kind of saying, well, now is the moment when we need to exact a penalty from these people, otherwise they'll never learn.
And there's an element of vengefulness. There's an element of hypocrisy, as you say. Yeah.
But what do you make of that? I mean, because they could argue like, leave aside vengefulness. Imagine they're just doing this rationally. Like, what do you make of that argument? Like, yes, technically we're being hypocrites, but if we are always the grown-ups in the room, I mean, this is the problem.
What I make of that is that that's a very short-sighted view, because what you're basically saying then is, let's forget liberalism.
Yeah,
we're just going to have war.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right. And it worsens polarization, and
yeah,
and the same point still applies, right? It's kind of like you were saying, like, oh, the woke left used to cancel people, but wait till we're back in power. Now we're in power, we can cancel them. But the same point applies to you. It's like, well, they're going to be back in power. I mean, in fact, they are in power.
It reminds me of a Scottish Highland clan feud or something. You know, one clan steals the other's cattle, and then so the others raids the first clan's village, and so it goes on round and round, and you get this cycle of hatred. And
yeah, it's like Aeschylus's Oresteia, if I can be Athenian for a moment. You know, there's this family feud, you know, centuries of kind of, or generations of vengeance and bloodshed. And then the solution to that in the play, in the trilogy, is that you basically found democratic institutions with Athena's help. I mean, maybe that's a metaphor for wisdom or something.
Yeah.
And then you have a way of arbitrating disputes. And I think we've grown up in a world where, at least in sort of liberal democratic countries, you've always felt there's like a rule-based order. I mean, I know they apply that to international relations, but internally there's always been this rule-based order that
backed by a culture of reasonable tolerance for difference.
Exactly. And also like the law is universal, so it applies equally, and norms are meant to be universal. And so I think it's very dangerous to start moving away from that world into this sort of game theoretical tit for tat.
So to pursue that argument a little bit, perhaps they would counter my argument by saying, well, that's all very well, but we're not going to have liberalism anyway. We'll just end up with perpetual left authoritarianism unless we fight.
Yeah, that's right. That's the argument.
I mean, I guess that's a genuine risk, although I'd observe that things always change. There's no kind of power structure that stays in place forever. But I also think that you're underestimating the potential power of liberal ideas by capitulating to that kind of dismal view of things.
Yeah. I also think there's a more principled way of actually exacting a penalty in a way which would be appropriate. And that is to go after not speech on the other side, but cancel culture. You know, like I think there should be much more of this. Like we sort of went by 2018, 2019, 2020, people being canceled left, right, and center. And we kind of like left that behind. And now I don't know if we need like a Truth and Reconciliation Commission or something, but there needs to be some process, maybe just a public process of sort of reputational adjustment where we look back and say, actually, wasn't it weird that you guys tried to, like, you know, example I always think of in classics, this Paideia Institute, a private classics teaching institute, which used to take students to Rome and Greece and teach them about classics. They got canceled basically for, like, one of them was just a conservative Catholic and they got canceled for that. Like, I think people should be looking back and seeing like, oh, the people who did that, like maybe we, you know, need to ruin their lives, but like they should
point out that it happened.
Yeah, they should be in trouble for canceling people. And in some cases when
or at least feel embarrassed or made to feel embarrassed.
And in some cases when cancellations violated the law, like I actually think that,
well,
in some, like when we talk about debanking and stuff, I'm pretty sure that like there's certain cancellations which actually violated key constitutional principles. Like I think we should litigate those things.
Right.
So we should disincentivize that kind of thing, cancel culture itself. We shouldn't just do what they're doing and go after speech.
Well, the other related thing, which is a lot more sort of pragmatic, for if you happen to be a politician who wins power, you can do things to strengthen liberal institutions. So if you find, for example, that courts have become too activist and they're interpreting the law consistently in ways that you think are biased.
Yeah, so for example, in New Zealand now, because the Supreme Court introduced tikanga in the Ellis case, there's very vague reference to tikanga, which is kind of Maori customary law. I mean, it's kind of, I think it should be disputed whether that's actually law or not, because law is meant to have certain features. So, I mean, yeah, you can say like this, and I think our colleague Roger Partridge has said this, the Supreme Court should be more neutral, and they should actually stick close to the fundamental principles of legal interpretation, which have been the case for centuries in the common law, and not just be kind of like, oh, all tikanga is good because it's politically correct.
That's right. And Roger made a number of recommendations about what government could do to strengthen the safeguards to keep the Supreme Court neutral. So you can do things like that.
Yeah.
You can pass legislation reinforcing consequences for universities if they violate people's academic freedom. So what I'm saying is that there are other things you can do with the levers of power other than go after your enemies.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right. So I think we both agreed that, like, I mean, I was being a bit more sort of negative than you in the sense that I think we should go after people who engage in cancel culture in a culpable way. Like we also investigate, be reasonable, don't just be vengeful. And you're sort of saying we should also tend to the kind of positive aspects of our liberal democracy.
Well, I guess if I was a politician and I was in a position to strengthen the institutions of democracy and liberalism, I would use my time to do that rather than going after anybody.
Yeah.
However, I would also think maybe, people like us who, if we've suddenly found ourselves, which I don't think we have in New Zealand yet, in a situation where the tables were turned and, there was a kind of anti-woke government or whatever.
Yeah.
We might do two things in that environment with things like our little podcast. We might say, first of all, woke left, now would be a good time for self-examination, and maybe invite some people on from that side of things to talk about it in a kind of even-handed way.
Yeah.
And we also might warn some of our fellow travelers not to get vengeful and to uphold the things that we've been saying for all this time. And now that you've got the power, don't forget free speech.
Yeah, and I do think that in the States it's very different because they've always had, like, I mean, the States is unusually religious for a country at its level of economic development, and it's always had a much stronger right, Republican Party, the Trump movement, Tea Party movement, whatever. And we don't really I think even Australia has a stronger right. Even Canada probably has a stronger right than in New Zealand. Like I mean, the Boston right. Like we have a very strong liberal right, which we're probably part of now, right?
You mean the Act?
Oh, I mean, even like we have a very strong center right, like the National Party has done well historically in elections. Yeah. We have a strong libertarian right in the form of the ACT Party.
But we don't have a strong conservative right.
We don't really have New Zealand First is kind of going.
They're conservative. Whether they're right is a slightly different question. Economically,
sure, okay. But I mean, I'm less worried about that in New Zealand. Like, I don't think we're going to get to the point where the far right, like in the States, it's really the far right now that's canceling the.
We do have a blood and soil ethno-nationalist party.
But it's very small, right? What's that?
The Māori Party.
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
They are.
They're far right in some sense. Yeah,
they're a blood and soil ethno-nationalist party is what they are,
and they're ultra conservative, right? Because it's all the stuff about we need to hew to tradition and rather than try to think outside.
So I would say in that sense, they're our furthest right party.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. I do think there is a sort of microcosm of what you were saying in New Zealand, where like. And it's around sort of feminism and TERFs. So basically, I think 2017, 2018, for a long time, like anyone who stood up and said, I think that men have rights too, we get canceled by feminists, especially at the university, right? The feminists kind of rule the roost in the university, often just by being like pissier than everybody else, right? Just like having emotional outbursts and stuff. When you're meant to actually talk about things rationally. And so all that happened. And then suddenly some of the feminists started to feel like, they were getting in trouble for being the wrong kinds of feminists, right? For being gender critical feminists and not going along with all the elements of the trans ideology. And then they sort of come running to us. I mean, not just us, but like the sort of heterodox movement, the free speech movement. And we have to kind of welcome them in because we want to be principled and we're in favor of free speech. Gladly
welcome them in.
Yeah, no, some of them I quite like and stuff. It's fine. And we interviewed Kathleen Stock. She was extremely reasonable. And we made this point to her.
Yeah.
But the point I'm making is just that, like, okay, but what about a few years ago when you guys were canceling men, and so we need to have like a moment of. You guys need to have a moment of reflection, right?
This reminds me of Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who listeners may or may not know was a dissident in Soviet Russia, and he found himself in the Gulag, and in the Gulag he wrote a book, a very famous book called the Gulag Archipelago, in which he was both documenting what life was like in the Gulag, but also writing a commentary on authoritarianism and the authoritarian Soviet system. And he encountered in the Gulag a number of people who remained committed communists, because, of course, being a committed communist and a party loyalist was no protection against being thrown in the Gulag. If Stalin decided he didn't like you, then the KGB or whoever it was would turn up on your doorstep and haul you off to the Gulag, irrespective of whether you'd been disloyal or not. But Solzhenitsyn had this kind of rule about engaging with people in the Gulag, which is that he wouldn't have anything to do with anybody who didn't face up to the fact that they'd been culpable in the Gulag system in the first place. If they were a communist, right? He wanted them to confront the fact that they were culpable.
Yeah.
And to his credit, even though he was never a communist, he spent a lot of time analyzing his own culpability for being in the Gulag, in the sense of not speaking up soon enough and not taking enough risks and so on. So, yeah.
All right. So another thing I wanted to talk about a little bit when we're talking about cancellation from the American, by the American right of people who are talking about Charlie Kirk in the wrong way. So one big thing that happened is that Trump did pressure the FCC to have Jimmy Kimmel, the comedian and late night host, fired.
Yep.
And so that's also like highly debated on X, but again, I got clothes to print off a few details. So the FCC, I didn't even know this. It's the Federal Communications Commission, a regulatory agency that licenses TV and radio stations in the States. And what happened with Kimmel is that ABC apparently is owned by Disney. So Disney took Jimmy Kimmel's late night talk show off the air indefinitely after he made comments about Charlie Kirk on air. And this happened after the FCC chairman, Brendan Carr, publicly suggested that Kimmel had contributed to, quote, a concerted effort to try to lie to the American people. So it looks pretty clear like Trump lent on them as well. And I think the confirmation of that is that after they got rid of him, of course, he's come back now, so they didn't get rid of him completely. But after they did that the first time, Trump celebrated on social media saying, congratulations to ABC for finally having the courage to do what had to be done. And that leaves Jimmy and Seth, two total losers on fake news NBC. The ratings are also horrible. Do it, NBC. Right? So some people are trying to deny this online now and say Jimmy Kimmel just did it as a publicity stunt. But I think which is kind of a conspiracy theory, I think, in my opinion. Like, I think it's pretty clear that, basically you have an arm of the state, a regulatory body, shutting down a comedian for saying something at the behest of the president. And I think that that's extremely serious. And some people are saying it's even more serious because previous cancel culture was kind of crowdsourced, and this is the state now getting involved in cancel culture.
There are various layers to it, aren't there? So, I mean, I agree with you. The idea that a political leader, especially a president, would lean on a broadcasting company to sack somebody, or in fact lean on any organization to sack anybody because they'd said something the president didn't like, is an act of overt political interference in free speech. There's no doubt about that. Assume for a moment Trump didn't do that and they just decided to sack him because, they didn't like what he said. Well, this is a regulatory body you're talking about, this FCC, right? And so if Kimmel had broken certain legislation, certain regulations about what you're allowed to say on air, then I guess there is a case for disciplining him.
Yeah. Keep going.
Because free speech is a public square thing, and so is a private broadcaster a public square? Not exactly. They're allowed to set rules for what you can do in their house, as it were, or say.
Yeah.
So to me, it's not. It's considerably less egregious. I think it's undesirable in the sense that you're promulgating a culture of lack of freedom or lack of free speech. The more you do that kind of thing, the more you try to regulate what people are allowed to say on air, the more you're constraining the atmosphere for the exchange of ideas or for making stupid jokes or, whatever.
Yeah, so just carrying on the argument then, because I know you have a view on this, but so we usually have wanted to argue, I think, in the past that regulations around what people can and cannot say on air should be kind of reasonably loose, right? I think we usually say that people should be allowed to say what they want. Although we're also concerned about press neutrality. So there's that. So what is it? So what's the argument? Like, what did Jimmy Kimmel say that some people think might have actually?
Jimmy, I think he was one of the ones who alleged that Charlie Kirk's murderer might have been a groper or an arch MAGA person who wasn't satisfied that Kirk was sufficiently, MAGA or whatever. I think he said something along those lines.
The Kimmel said, the quotation here, the MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them. So he basically asserts there that the assassin was MAGA. Okay, and so I think the strongest form of the argument is something like, that is actually a false statement.
So it's fairly clearly a false statement. Whether it's a lie depends on whether he thought he...
I don't know how clear. I would just say that, like, I've struggled with this, as I said at the beginning. Like I'm
Mm.
I'm online and I'm trying to figure out who's telling the truth and who's not and what's accurate. And there was maybe a day or two where I saw people on social media saying, "Oh, maybe he was actually on the far right,"
Mm.
and I was like, "I don't know. Like I don't have access to a lot of the evidence that the police have.
That's
Maybe
true.
other people know
I mean, it
more."
always seemed unlikely, and
But
now,
imagine
yeah.
I'd been forced to imagine my job was to be a late night host or something, and I've been forced to
Mm.
go on and do a stand up routine about. You probably wasn't forced to address it, but like it's a big issue. You could probably going to address it, and I was under the impression that maybe it was a right wing person. I'm just wrong, right? Like there's nothing wrong with me. Like, if he was on the BBC or the whatever the American equivalent is, and it's like a newscast and he's the news anchor, then I think there's a high bar for like you need to have these things verified, and then you might get in trouble. But for me, this guy is essentially a stand-up comedian. Like he's a
Mm.
late night
Was he
host.
doing comedy at the
I
time?
think
It
I
doesn't
think
sound like a very funny line, but
no, but like a lot of
I don't know what the context was. So.
a lot of stand-up comedy, as you'd see if you came to my sessions, is not very funny, right? Especially in those contexts, it's just kind of very political. I've never really liked late night as a genre that much, but yeah, like in late night, my understanding is I've seen a little bit of it. Is you have the bit where you interview guests, but you also stand like Bill Maher does this as well, which I watch a little bit more.
Mm.
Like he stands up at some points, especially at the beginning, and he has like a 5 minute slot where he tells jokes and stuff.
Mm.
And I think it's a very worrying thing, and it sets a very bad precedent if you're going to go after people for inaccuracies in their stand-up routine.
Well,
That's
yeah,
very
I mean,
very dangerous.
you shouldn't really be looking for accurate reporting in
Yeah,
stand up. I think
that's funny.
that's a very fair point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. All right, so I actually
But irrespective of that, what happened was egregious, principally because there was political interference, or it was politically motivated.
yeah, right. So I guess if you want to drive the argument that like the FCC does have a responsibility for stopping people saying obviously untrue things on air or like unverified things on air in certain contexts, then it should be at least a very above board neutral process.
Yeah.
The president shouldn't be involved at all. People shouldn't be reacting to what's happening on social media. It should just be very kind of neutral and professional and procedural, right? And obviously in this case, it was none of those things.
That's right.
All right, so we're wrapping up now, I think, but
Yeah.
we wanted to return, I think, because I do think that obviously, like, we're hypocrites if we don't talk about the cancellations that are now happening from the right on people who said bad things about Charlie Kirk. However, I don't want to lose sight of the fact, and I think a lot of people are losing sight of this fact. Jimmy Kimmel, what happened to him was indefensible and bad. He got removed from his show briefly. It looked like it was going to be indefinite. That was bad. However, someone else got shot, probably for his views. And for me, that's like, I don't want to exaggerate. I don't want to say that all leftism leads to this, because I think it's a very rare case, and there are always going to be some crazy people. However, it's a big thing. It's a very bad thing that's happened, and it's sort of it's an inflection point, I think, in this whole period.
It's a terrible thing that's happened, and also it's kind of an extreme case of violence, but violence has been happening for a while now. I mean, the organization Antifa is well known to commit violence against people that it thinks are conservative activists. They're not necessarily. I mean, I happen to know certain figures. Well, Peter Boghossian, for example, who has been physically attacked by Antifa thugs.
Yeah, no, I mean, the people who say, like, if you look at the past few years, I mean, especially 2020, the George Floyd stuff, everybody kicked off, and there was all this looting and burning of shops and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And that was kind of like, and people set up, their own like anarchist communities in certain places, which part of me thinks is kind of cool, because I like
What was
social
totally weird
experimentation.
about
But
that?
basically, they completely ignored the, like a huge set of people completely ignored the law. Remember, it was during COVID as well.
It was during the
It was a
lockdown. And you weren't allowed to, go out of your house more than whatever a day to go for a walk. But suddenly it's perfectly all right.
Yeah.
The thousands and thousands of people are on the streets burning shops and looting.
And if you're Canadian truckers, then you get debanked. I mean, some of them maybe went too far and they made too much noise during the protest or something. But it was obviously like they were looking at those protests and the protests here at Parliament. You know, again, maybe they're trespassing. They strictly shouldn't have been there at all. But like, the way that the state and the establishment looked at those protests was very different to the way they looked at the George Floyd stuff.
Yeah.
I don't think there was much violence around George Floyd here, but definitely in the States there was lots of violence.
I remember clearly a year after the George Floyd thing, I ended up being stuck in Melbourne in a lockdown for a few weeks, and saw on television at the time some people who were lockdown breakers and then protesting against the lockdowns. And the way in which the ABC, the Australian Broadcasting Commission, talked about these people, it was very similar to the way the the media here talked about the parliamentary
yeah,
protests.
yeah.
They're all scumbags, and whereas a year earlier, the ABC was perfectly celebratory of the Black Lives Matter protests in Melbourne, as well
Yeah.
as the ones in America and elsewhere. So
Yeah.
there was definitely an enormous amount of hypocrisy.
Yeah, so I mean, so I know there's a debate online on X or Twitter now about like which side is the most violent. Again, I try and like not get involved because I think it's another aspect of polarization. It's like you guys started it, no, you
Yeah,
started it.
yeah.
But it has to be said that like it seems like the establishment were kind of turning a blind eye to a lot of violence on the far left. Now, I will add that there's a thing going around online by the Cato Institute where they actually categorize assassinations and stuff like that, and bombings and acts of extreme violence, I think, by political affiliation. And they find that there's more violence from the far right than the far left. Now, a lot of people dispute this. However, for me, I haven't looked into the figures or the methodology, but at first blush, it's like the Cato Institute to me is not like it's a pretty balanced organization. It's not a woke organization. It's not like the Southern Poverty and Law Center or whatever, right? Like
I would have thought it would lean a little bit right.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, and I think to look into these questions, who causes the most violence, you have to do that carefully and with methodological rigor and stuff. And people shouldn't just go on impressions. However, it's also true, I think, what we just said, that it did seem like we just lived through a period when the far left were getting away with a lot of pretty extreme violence.
I wonder what they took into account, whether they counted all the mass lootings and so on during the George Floyd thing as being left-wing violence or not.
We should add that the most egregious act of violence in recent New Zealand history, in fact, the whole of New Zealand history domestically, was a far-right shooter in Christchurch.
Well, actually, I think it's questionable whether Brenton Tarrant is far-right.
In what sense?
Well, he called himself an eco-fascist, which I suppose
fascist bit's probably all right.
What about the eco part?
Yeah, that's fair.
And I mean, he was a proponent of the great replacement theory, which
the focus on ethnicity is more.
It was certainly a focus on ethnicity, but also a kind of environmentalism that was driving his thinking.
Yeah,
I mean, he was obviously unhinged because you don't do something like that unless you are.
Well, that's the thing. That's what I sort of think about this gunman too. It's like to a certain extent, I just think some people are crazy, and like whatever ideologies are around, it's actually similar to if we go back to like the aftermath of 9/11, right? That was a period when suddenly like people were saying we've got to talk about Islamic terrorism, and yes, there's like a small number of Islamists who were driving planes into buildings, but then there was this crackdown I felt from George W. Bush's government on kind of like there was this general suspicion of Muslims. And that's just like sloppy statistics, right? Some people are going to take Islamic or Muslim ideas and go crazy with them and kill people.
Yep.
And there probably is a lot of that in Islamic texts, but there's also some violence in Christian texts. Like Jesus says, I've come to bring a sword, not peace, but a sword, right? So you can take that and run with it if you wanted
to be
most people don't.
A lot more in the Quran.
Maybe there's more. Yeah. But anyway, I'm trying to make the general point that like, in many of the world's great faiths or ideologies, there's some stuff you could take and use to sort of justify violence. Most people don't do that, so we got to be careful, even with wokeism.
But violence has been justified in the name of every religion. So, even Buddhism.
Even Buddhism, yeah, that's right. I mean, a lot of the Zen priests were very involved in the Japanese Empire in World War II. All right, so final thing I want to say, because then I got to run pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Are you allowed to be a Christian? Because this is in our societies, this is an interesting thing. I mean, obviously, in some sense, yes, you can go to church and stuff. You have liberties in that sense. But it's kind of interesting to me because I think we both grew up in worlds that were, I mean, probably more me than you, but you too. We grew up in worlds that were more Christian and where Christianity was still pretty much the establishment. I mean, you could obviously get away with not being.
So I would say it was more so when I was a child than when you were.
Yeah, I was. I guess I said that because I went to an Anglican boarding school.
Oh, right.
But you also had a lot of Anglicanism in your youth.
I was raised in the Anglican Church, I suppose you'd say. Yeah.
And I think we're at this point in our lives that we both don't agree with fundamental Christian claims. And we think that, I mean, I watched some of Charlie Kirk's videos, and there's some points where he says, like, it says in the Bible, you shouldn't be gay. He's against gay marriage. I've always been in favor of gay marriage. I don't think there's anything wrong with being gay. Nonetheless, I don't want people to get shot for being Christian, and I don't want people to be canceled for being Christian.
I actually rather like Christians. I find myself very sympathetic to a lot of the things that they say, even though I don't agree with them on certain points of Christian doctrine.
Right. Yeah. No, I had a good experience with Christianity in my past, so I have no ill feelings whatsoever. In fact, I'm probably slightly biased towards them. Although, of course, like a lot of people have had very bad experiences of Christian churches with
I did
abuse.
Myself, I wouldn't say it was abuse. I just found it a pretty, like, the church where I was involved in some bad behavior. Yeah.
All right. So, I guess what I want to close with then is just to bring it back to New Zealand. It's really interesting. I saw it just last night pop up on my YouTube. And now people know all about my YouTube algorithm. But I've been doing research into Charlie Kirk. So, the Family First New Zealand, Bob McCroskey, is he called?
He is.
He did an interview with Israel Folau and Maria Folau, and I found that really interesting. I just watched 5 minutes of it before going to bed.
So this is the rugby player who was thrown out of the Australian League a few years ago for being against gay marriage.
It's a very good fullback. All of this is irrelevant, but some rugby content for our New Zealand listeners. You know, everyone knows Izzy Folau, great fullback, really good under the high ball, superb player. He was his Tongan heritage, some kind of evangelical Christian. He posted a couple things. One was just saying, I love and respect everybody, but I'm against gay marriage during the gay marriage debate in Australia. Second thing was a bit more full on. He posted a meme about fornicators, adulterers, all these people, and then including homosexuals. At the end, it said, these people are all going to hell. Again, I laugh partly because I just think that's quite full on, but I don't agree with that at all. But in a sense, I think it's sort of Orthodox Christian belief. Like, okay, you can read the Bible in creative ways and stuff, but like for most of the Christian centuries, Christians have believed that it's wrong to be gay. I don't agree with that at all. I think it's a terrible thing that we did that for so long. Well,
but the number of references to it in the Bible have vanished.
Yeah, there's something like 2 or 3, but they're pretty clear.
There's one in Leviticus where a whole lot of things like eating shellfish are ruled out.
Yeah, of course.
This is the ancient Jewish law.
If you live completely biblically, you'd be living this absurd life.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, I can't see how that counts because we don't do all those or Christians don't do all those other things that are prescribed by Leviticus. Yeah. The other is
Romans.
Paul's epistle to the Romans, where he says that men shouldn't lie together or something along those lines. It's not. I mean, I don't think. I mean, Jesus never mentioned it. I'm certain of that. He didn't say anything about homosexuality at all.
You may be right about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it seems to me
it's true what I say that most
peripheral matter in Christian doctrine.
Although, I mean, to be fair, like most Christian, as I say, like most Christian churches throughout the past few centuries have seen gayness, homosexuality as
they
wrong.
Absolutely have, and you know, there have been inquisitions that have gone after gay people and so on. So the church itself has made much more of it, I think, than is justified from what it says about it in the Bible.
Yeah, I mean, my point is just like, again, I don't agree with that. I don't think it's even a good argument to say, look, Christian churches have always done this, because who cares? Like, they might have been wrong. I think they probably were wrong about a lot, including that.
Yeah,
but it's just that, like, it's still
okay, it's his belief.
It's still the largest religion in New Zealand. We have to have a liberal democratic state if we want it to be a liberal democratic state in which people are allowed to exercise their religion freely. Israel Folau was obviously in Australia, but his wife is a New Zealander, played for the Silver Ferns, Maria Folau, and she supported him. And she got a lot of stick for it. I don't think she was ever deplatformed or anything, or she had very severe consequences. But, you know, that's another episode from years ago where it's like, that guy just got canceled. His contract was severed with the Wallabies. I mean, they said, oh, we had a social media policy that he didn't follow, but I definitely didn't see them cracking down on any kind of like woke expressions of politics, right?
Right.
So I can't remember what the exact terms were. But anyway, I guess I just wanted to close on that note, like a warning, like we shouldn't exaggerate. This one guy got killed in the States. Maybe it was just a crazy person, but there is real, I think, actual persecution of sort of strong expressions of Orthodox Christian belief. And that is wrong. And also there's a risk if you agree with us that gay marriage is a good thing and gays should be liberated, then don't attack Christians, argue with them. If you attack them and in the worst cases shoot them or like drive them out of their careers, even though they're great under the high ball, you know, that's just going to make people think, actually, maybe those Christians, maybe I'm on their side, right? And they're going to look into Christianity more and feel more sympathy with it.
Yep.
So,
yep. Be careful what you do when you've got power, because sooner or later you won't. And then you may make yourself a target for vengeance or for that kind of game theoretical thinking.
Yeah.
So, you know, to all freedom-loving listeners out there, just stay on the case with free speech. It's not for only things that you agree with. It's especially for things that you don't. And for people who say things you hate.
I don't think that I need to worry particularly about being in power, but actually, no, I forget. What am I saying? We actually control everything, don't we? Because we're in the Atlas. No, well, that obviously, but also because this Free Kiwis is independent from the New Zealand Initiative.
Our tentacles.
But because we happen to work for the New Zealand Initiative,
that's right.
We are actually an octopus sitting on the beehive, using its tentacles to
control all the politicians.
So there is that. All right, let's end there before we give too much away about how that works.
See you next time.